Are going to jump right in. I wanted to section off this particular section of the book because it is controversial, because it has implications for us today, as well as because it is something that I think, while these are difficult topics, ultimately, I think they provide the most rational approach to these ideas, as well as immense peace and immense comfort for so many of the struggles that we face today. So this book, what we're going to do at this point in time is we are continuing our study of the testimony. Now, for those who are not have not caught up or are new to the book club, let me just inform you, kind of give you a little background here as to what the testimony is. So the covenant that God made with ancient Israel at Mount Sinai, as well as on the plains of Deuteronomy shortly before Israel entered the promised land, involved several aspects. There were the stipulations of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. These commandments were further divided into the law of Moses that showed Israel a way to apply these to everyday life, into real world situations. The covenant was very, very close to a constitution, a modern constitution, in the idea that it would provide for a government that would ensure the people were not oppressed and would assure that liberty and justice and an egalitarian society, which means that all men, all women, all people were created equal in the eyes of God. They were endowed with inalienable rights, and that they were to be on a level playing field in the eyes of the law when they came for justice and for judgment. So these are the ideas that God established. Within this covenant, God also established penalties if Israel should disobey. Now, and I see you're here this morning, Greg. I'm so glad you could make it from down under. Great to have you with us. So this covenant that God made with Israel, the specific part is called the testimony. You'll find it in Leviticus 26. You will also find it in Deuteronomy 28 through 30. And what we have shown, I show this in my book, YHWH Exists. You will also see this in the previous YouTube videos. All of these videos are either on YouTube or they are on my Facebook wall on the YHWH Exists page. So I invite you guys to go back and re-listen to them if you're unfamiliar with them. But what we're doing is we are showing the correlation between Deuteronomy and Leviticus. And then we're going through step by step and seeing how these curses were placed upon Israel during the divided kingdom era. It began in 944 BCE, right after the reign of King Solomon, under the reign of King Rehoboam, when the nation divided in two. Leviticus 26 enumerates 7 times periods, 70-year periods, where a specific curse would fall on Israel. And then in that next time period, it says 7 times more will I punish you for your sins. Well, these are 7 different or 70 years of curses, and they are different curses. It doesn't mean that the former curses necessarily go away, but it means that there are more being added to them, with the idea that as Israel is placed under hardship, as Israel is placed under a corrective state, that Israel will return and will refrain from doing those things that have caused YHWH to inflict discipline on them, and that they will return to him, and that they will return to a way of life that works. We have also gone through and studied how the law of Moses, the instructions within that law, created life. Ezekiel 33:15 calls the law of Moses the statutes of life, with the idea that there are things that if you follow them, they produce long life for all of humanity. So we're going to actually look at a little of this today, because what the law does in this section, if you will remember, last week we studied and we saw how Israel was taken off of the land. You had the deportation by Nebuchadnezzar. Judah is no longer a people in the sight of YHWH. Both the northern kingdom as well as the southern kingdom have been divorced from YHWH. So there's controversy as to what constitutes divorce from God. in the biblical sense, and that is always divorce from the land. When you are taken away from the land, when you do not have self-autonomy, you cannot rule over yourself, but you have a foreign faction ruling over you. All of those things are signify a divorce, a separation from Yahweh, not being able to live by his laws anymore. Throughout scripture, we see that Yahweh gives to Israel, he gives to humanity the very lusts, the very dysfunctions that they desire. He doesn't withhold that from them. So, what you find is that when Israel desires oppression, Yahweh gives her depression. Or oppression, he also gives her depression as well, as we will see. But you'll also see that when Israel desires false deities, false religion, God gives all of that to her with the idea that one day those ways and that destructive pattern will be so unfulfilling that eventually Israel will come back and desire something that is healthy, something that is fulfilling. I really compare this to the junk food religion. Look at the world today. Most of us want our little Hostess cupcakes and our little Debbie's and our soft drinks. So many foods that we know are not healthy for us. They taste good. They give us a great emotional high, a great high to our taste buds. But in the end, we know that those type of foods do not produce health. They lead to diabetes. They lead to cardiovascular diseases. And these are things that have been researched and published in major medical journals. So, it is backed by scientific evidence. So what you see in the Torah is that the pattern Yahweh established for Israel's correction wasn't going to take just a few years. He saw this being a generational issue that would take not just a few hundred years to correct, but a few thousand. So this phase of the testimony, which we have seen thus far, is that the testimony has focused on Israel while they were on the promised land. Well, Israel's no longer on the promised land, so now what does the testimony address? What we are going to see, and we are going to go to the slideshow here in just a moment, what we are going to see is that now the testimony addresses Israel's descendants, Israel's progeny throughout the diaspora. So he's not just addressing one or two generations, but hundreds, probably about 40 or 50 years of generations, rather 40 to 50 generations, which would span 2,000 years of living off of the promised land. So we're going to look at what Yahweh prophesied would occur while Israel was off of the land, while she was not living according to the covenant, while she was doing what was right in her own eyes, serving other deities, and living by the laws of other nations. So I'm going to cut now to the slideshow. So this is, we are only doing a few pages today because I really wanted to focus on this particular section. So I'm going to go ahead and transition now to the second one. And what we are going to be looking at specifically is going to be the curses of the law. Now, I cannot see exactly what is going on screen. So if you guys find an issue with the audio or the video, please let me know in the comments section. I do believe the comments will show before my video feed. There is about a 30 to 40 second lag between what I am broadcasting and what is showing on the actual Facebook feed. So just to recap, previously in Deuteronomy 28:52 through 57, the testimony had foretold Judah's diaspora and ultimately the diaspora of the entire nation of Israel. The testimony now switches focus from Israel on Yahweh's land and living in his sight to their life of her children living off the land. So what we're going to be dealing with today, because remember last week we did deal with Deuteronomy 28:52 through 57, or rather 2 weeks ago. And now we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy 28 verses 58 through 62, which again is addressed to Israel's descendants throughout the diaspora. So in some ways it's kind of curious, because if we are looking for people who bear say some sort of sign or hallmark of Israel, this is actually going to give us kind of a pretty good idea as to who some of these people may be. So during the diaspora, the number one, and this is just kind of a summary, you find that there are plagues that Jehovah places upon Israel and her seed during the diaspora until she is redeemed a second time. The first time she is redeemed is at the first Exodus, when Israel comes off of out of the land of Egypt. The second Exodus refers to a time when Israel is gathered from all nations of the earth and restored back to the land. That is an event that has yet to happen. So the testimony is consistent. We saw previously in verses 42 through 46 is that Yahweh had issued all the curses of Deuteronomy against the descendants of the northern kingdom. And now what we find is that verses 58 through 62 issue this again for all of the people of the land. So now it's targeting Judah, but not only is it targeting Judah, it's really targeting the whole entire house of Israel. And this is the curse of disease. And disease, there are other things that are enumerated in this verse, but it is really disease that stands out as the defining curse within the book of Deuteronomy. And we are going to look at this in detail, again, 58 through 68. It says, if you will not observe to do all the words of the law that are written in this book, this is again a reference to the book of Deuteronomy, that you may fear this glorious and fearful name, Yahweh your Elohim, then Yahweh will make your plagues wonderful, and the plagues of your seed, even great plagues of very long continuance and very sore sickness of long continuance. What does this sound like? This is describing terminal type diseases, diseases that wouldn't last for a few days or a few weeks, but could last for years on end. It says, moreover, he will bring on you all the diseases of Egypt, which you were afraid, and they will cleave to you. They will cleave to you. Also, every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the book of this law, those will Yahweh bring upon you until you are destroyed, and you will be left very few in number, where you were as the stars of heaven in multitude, because you would not obey the voice of Yahweh your God. So this is not a pleasant thing. This curse mentions Israel's destruction, but it's not an utter destruction, because Yahweh says that even in that destruction they'll be left few in multitude. But whereas they were once a great and mighty nation, they are now going to be a very small remnant. And of course, the reason for this is that they would not obey a way of life that works and a way of life that tends to life. So what are the diseases of Egypt? We find that they're cancer, heart disease, cardiovascular diseases, arthritis, osteoarthritis, osteomyelitis, spina bifida, parasitic diseases. Now, I say these are the diseases of Egypt because they really are. Many studies have been done in the last 100 years of cadavers. These would really be mummies from ancient Egypt. Some of these mummies date as late as 800 BC. Some of them are earlier. The real early pharaohs or members of his royal household that we have access to, whereon studies have been conducted, it's hard to get DNA, which is what you have to extract from the bones of the mummies. And the reason it's hard to get DNA is that it breaks down. And if you cannot find a sample that is intact within the bones, then you cannot do the necessary DNA testing. Well, thankfully, we have had enough samples in recent years, as well as the testing procedures have increased, that you can actually perform tests to see what type of diseases the ancient pharaohs struggled with. And, in many ways, you could call some of the Egyptian diseases rich man diseases. You find that ancient Egypt fed on bread, they fed on wine, lots of beer, and lots of bread were in the Egyptian diet. And because you find that with this disease, it produced a whole bunch of other diseases. So cancer that was once debated, that controversy has now been solved because we have now found cancer in Egyptian cadavers. And I see that there are some problems with sound. Greg, if you would try refreshing and let me know if the sound improves, I would appreciate it. Let me type that because you may not be hearing me that question if you don't have sound. Now, I had trouble this morning as well. I don't know if it is a Facebook issue because I also had sound this morning. I had trouble. Please let me know if it improves. Okay, sorry, I have trouble multitasking here. So with the Egyptian diseases, we find that there are a lot of the common diseases that Americans and Europeans and people around the world struggle with today. They're really not new. Okay, so thank you, David, for letting me know that you're good. I don't know if it's regional, but I do know that, again, I had a lot of trouble this morning. So if it's the weather in our area, a multitude of factors, or just with Facebook, maybe doing some updates behind the scene that we are unaware of. All of those could be contributing factors. So why would Jehovah issue this type of curse on Israel's descendants? Why would God want there to be diseases on Israel? That really sounds like a very harsh and cruel God. So that is really a question we have to struggle with. It's a question that I think deserves an answer as we search for truth, as we get to know Israel's God. And, is he some sort of tyrannical deity who just wants to inflict pain and suffering? Or is there something more to what he says regarding disease? So this is something that Yahweh had stated at the waters of Meribah when the waters were bitter, and Moses cast a tree in the waters and they became sweet. This is what the text says. It says, if you will diligently listen to the voice of Yahweh your God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments and keep his statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians, for I am Yahweh that heals you. Well, first of all, we find that Yahweh is capable of healing. So then the question that a lot of us struggle with is, if he's capable of healing, why does he withhold it in the lives of so many people? I think all of us are touched by the loss of a loved one through cancer, through heart disease. Now, I'm not talking about accidents. I am strictly talking about diseases. The question is, A, can they be prevented? And the question secondarily, or B, is why has Yahweh not prevented these type of diseases? And what I found in my study, because these were questions that I struggled with as I researched many of the instructions of the law, many of the instructions into the validity of the Tanakh. And what I found is that there is a direct correlation between the prescription, and I am going to call them prescriptions of the law, what the law instructs us to do, how it instructs us to live lifestyle, and being healthy. I did cover this in chapter 6, the chapter entitled "None of These Diseases," but we find that there is a direct correlation between kashrut, circumcision, consuming fat and blood, quarantine, abstinence from sex during menses. All of these things have a correlation between disease and being healthy to some degree or another. Circumcision has been studied on 7 continents amongst all races and nationalities. Religion was not a factor, but in every single case and in every single country, there was a correlation between circumcision and a reduced rate of sexually transmitted diseases, a reduced rate of cancer in the female partners of those who were circumcised. Males that were circumcised, in other words, their female partners had a reduced risk of contracting cancer. And the theory behind this is that with circumcision, there are various bacterium that live within the foreskin, and that will cause inflammation. It will cause also not only inflammation, but also illness and eventually disease within the female partner. And that is one reason why circumcision is so important, not just for the man, but also for the woman. Blood and fat, we are finding more and more that there is a correlation between blood and disease. And we know too, like if you go to a blood bank and you want to give blood, your blood is screened for certain diseases. And if you are a carrier, sometimes you may not contract that disease, but you are a carrier. And if that is the case, then usually they will not accept your blood at donation banks. Quarantine, what have we heard, especially with this flu epidemic? Wash your hands, wash your hands. Try not to go out in public, especially if you're at risk, if you're elderly, a young child. You want to protect and quarantine because you may not have the antibodies to fight that particular strain of virus that is out there right now. Kashrut, David Mock, back in 1968, conducted different tests on various types of meat. And he found a direct correlation between the toxicity, meaning both the bacterium, the diseases, the parasites, everything that was contained in unclean meats had a much higher rate of toxicity than the clean meats. And then what you find that the diseases that are within the clean meats, like cow and lamb, you find, for instance, especially in the case of mad cow and say anthrax, that both of those diseases can be traced back to human intervention where we engage in unwise practices. For instance, cows are herbivores. They eat grass. But then when we introduce meat and bone meal to their diet, then they contract diseases because they really are not supposed to eat their own kind, which is what is a traditional feed that is actually in modern meat markets and in modern cattle farms is actually given to them now. Anthrax also became brilliant when farmers in the 1800s and I believe actually 1700s, during times of drought, times of famine, they would actually feed the living lambs and the living sheep. They would feed them the dead, rotten corpses of the sheep who had died. And because they were eating their own kind, that is where anthrax developed. So everything that we find, the diseases begin with a violation of natural law. Now, does the Torah enumerate every single violation of natural law? No, it does not. But it does give us enough of a foundation that a lot of those things can be deduced from what we do know. So now we're going to look at during the diaspora, these diseases, how have they played out? And there's also a claim that I want to address as well. And that is the claim that all the curses of the law always lead to death. Let's look at, I'm really big on accountability and holding the text accountability, holding claims of the text accountable, whether they're claims within Judaism, whether they're claims within Christianity, whether they are in claims from any religious sect or movement or group. It doesn't matter. Do the claims match what the text states? So let's investigate this claim along the way as we look at Israel's curses during the diaspora. Let's look at these specific curses within the law. Again, this was enumerated previously when the northern kingdom was taken off the land. In verse 22, it says, Yahweh will smite you with a consumption, fever, inflammation, extreme burning, the sword, and with blasting or blight and mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. Now, the question is, does this perish mean that it will end in death for every person? Or does this mean perish as a nation before Yahweh? So it's very important that we qualify our terms as we investigate these particular curses. So let's summarize these particular curses. We find that they fall into three broad categories. The first being illness and disease. The second being war and persecution, that would be the sword. And the third being pestilence and disease of crops and produce of the land. Now, it's very interesting, this idea of pestilence and disease of crops, because even though it is the final disease that is mentioned, it really contributes to the other two in many ways. When crops are unhealthy, you find that it can lead to famine, which is a disease. Starvation is actually a disease. You can also find that when there is diseases of the crops, you don't get the vitamins and the nutrients. You don't have the yields that you would normally have. So again, it contributes disease. As Hippocrates said, let medicine be your food and let food be your medicine. Well, if your medicine is diseased, you are not going to enjoy good health from that. And it's very interesting too. If you've ever wondered about 2 Chronicles 7:14, which I don't know about you guys, it's one of my favorite verses. But in that text, Jehovah states that, if we'll humble ourselves and pray, that he will hear our voice. But he doesn't say that he will heal us. What he says is that I will heal your land. So the key to the healing and health among humans is really this healing of the land. War and persecution is often, not always, but often a contributing factor is the lack of natural resources. When one nation is starving, they will often seek to find food and rations from other nations, and wars have been fought throughout the millennia for that purpose. All right, so now we're going to look at something a little bit more specific. Today, in say 2016, 2018, are there evidence of the curses of the law within people today? And I'm just going to say broad people. These could be the children of Israel. They may not be the children of Israel, but is there some correlation to observing the Torah and to the diseases that we see today? So in 2016, you find that there were over almost 1.6 or 1.7 million new cases of cancer just in that year. You find that in 1 year, almost 600,000 people will die from the disease just in 1 year. Heart disease. You find that about 610,000 people die of heart disease in the United States every year. And that accounts for 1 in 4 deaths. That is huge. 25% of our population is dying to heart disease, something that actually is very preventable if you return to the Torah, as we will see. So heart disease kills about 370,000 people every year. Now we're going to go to the disease upon our land. You find that pesticides only in the U.S., and I'm just talking the U.S. alone, then it's pervasive in all nations. Europe, Russia, they actually use just as many pesticides as we do. But in the U.S., 1.1 billion pounds of pesticides are used annually. Now, these pesticides are not used. Hold on just a minute. Britannia, have a good time, hon. My daughter is leaving for a sleepover, so just wanted to wish her well. Anyways, so pesticides, 1.1 billion pounds are used every year. Now, these do not, again, come without consequence or side effects, because what we have found, and I invite each of you to research, things like glycophosphates show a direct correspondence between using those pesticides and cancer, as well as Alzheimer's, and so many other diseases come from using those chemicals. So it is not that you skirt around the curses. Sometimes, you put a Band-Aid, just think of that leaking dam. You put your finger in the dam in one place and it sprouts a hole in another place. So while we're patching it up and putting a Band-Aid on what is causing these diseases, it isn't curing them. And in many cases, it's actually encouraging other problems because we are not dealing with the actual root of the issue, so to speak. Play on pun intended there. The other evidence that we have through war and persecution, and again, Israel is not alone in this. China's faced war, Japan has faced war, Africa has faced war. War is really part of human nature. But what set Israel apart from all the other nations that where war was indeed a factor of their society and part of their normal society was the fact that Israel had peace. Israel did not have the wars that other nations had. So that was what distinguished her rather than war itself. But now, as Israel loses her sanctification where she did not have disease, her sanctification where she knew Yahweh, she knew his name, she knew her God, she walked in her ways, and she dwelt in peace without war and without persecution. Now she was going to become common, just like all the other nations of the earth that dealt with war, that dealt with persecution on an ongoing basis. Now, let me say this about persecution, because persecution really developed as a new idea during the Second Temple period. You did not find religious persecution until the reign of the Ptolemies. And it was during that time in Egypt where you had Jewish religious factions that would side with one arm of power against another, and then discover they were on the wrong side of the power, the faction that ended up with power. And because of that, the rulers, mainly the Syrians as well as the Ptolemies, really got tired of being played against each other or not being supported. And that really brought about some of the first waves of religious persecution that we have ever seen in the history of mankind. But what it did is that it did not go away. It really was really a beginning. Those persecutions were later inherited by the Holy Roman Empire, the Church of Rome. So let's just go through some of this evidence of war and persecution that had a direct effect on those lost 10 tribes of Israel, on Jews. Throughout history, what do we see? Well, we see that persecution by the Holy Roman Church estimated that well over 200,000 people died in the course. I mean, we're not talking over a few years. We're talking over a couple, almost 1,000 years of persecution. The Crusades also brought death and destruction, as did Ottoman expansion of the Ottoman Empire. You also have persecution by wars in Europe and the Mideast. In World War I alone, there were 20 million deaths and 21 million wounded. In World War II, 80 million deaths. Now and of course, this 80 million deaths do include the Holocaust as well, where you had between 5 and 6 million Jews that were also slaughtered. Now, these deaths do not include Russia's Stalin persecution, where it is estimated another 80 to 120 million people died, or Mao Zedong's persecution in China, where again, another almost 100 million people died in China due to reforms that were implemented that ended in not only mass starvation, but also persecution of peasants upon the land who could contribute nothing to Mao's regime. So you had this incredible era of persecution, of war, of famine. And really, during many of these times, you also had eras of civil war where brother raised hand against brother. So if you look back over the past 2,000 years of human history, we really haven't been defined by peace, but we have been defined by one war after the other. English wars are given names, whether it's the 7 Years' War, or the War of the Roses, or, King George's War. You have all these different wars, and that we have accepted that as a normal course of action in human history. It's just a part of living on the earth. But in Yahovah's mind, and what we see according to the Tanakh and to the Torah, that is not the paradigm. That is not what Yahovah considers normal, but rather it is the curse of the law. The persecution and the wars are the curse of the law. They are certainly not the blessing of it. Continuing now with the curses of the law, another specific curse states, curse shall be the fruit of your body. This is often evidenced in infertility. I'm not going to go through all these statistics. Suffice it to say that 12% of the population deal with infertility, and today over 7 million people in the United States have sought fertility services. This is a pretty big, significant portion of the population that is unable to conceive. So infertility is only one method or one means by which the fruit of one's body could be cursed. You also see it in birth defects, as well as in infant mortality, where in the United States, 20% of all infant deaths are due to birth defects, and 1 in 33 children in the United States are indeed born with birth defects. These are things that will cause impairment to them in life. And what this often happens is that children inherit this within their DNA. In other words, it is passed down. So when we look at Exodus 35, where Yahovah states that the sins of the fathers are passed down to the third and fourth generation, we need to take some heart in that, because what we do does indeed affect our children. You can look, go to the 23andMe, and you can do your DNA study. And they can show you based on your DNA what diseases you are likely to inherit. I've mentioned this before, but Angela Jolie, the actress, did the study, and she had aunts and I believe a mother that all had breast cancer. She discovered that she also carried that gene whereby she would could develop breast cancer. So she opted to have a double mastectomy in order to in hopes of preventing that. So my point is that diseases can be inherited. The lifestyles and the choices we make, the foods we eat, those things can be inherited by our children. So we have to choose very, very wisely. But what we're seeing though is, and we will see as we go on, is that there is a correlation between choosing health and living right in the eyes of the law and good health. So one of the last ones that we're going to look at, one of the last curses that is enumerated, is this curse of living in diaspora and worshiping false deities. I'm just going to read verse 64 real quick. It says, Yahovah will scatter you among all people from one end of the earth to the other, and there you will serve other deities, which neither you nor your fathers have known, even gods of wood and stone. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because when you are in other lands and serving other deities, you're going to be living under a system of oppression. So many of the religions of the earth today are really defined by guilt. They encourage a certain amount of guilt within their adherents. They also encourage their believer to be a victim. Don't take a fellow brother into court. Rather, even if it means that you were taken advantage of or you were abused, simply turn your cheek and turn a blind eye to it. Most of these religions can be marked by two qualifications. Number one, they encourage self-affliction over self-discipline, and they encourage self-sacrifice over self-control. Remember throughout Torah, whether we look in the book of Samuel or we look in the book of Jeremiah, remember over and over again, Yahovah stresses, I desire obedience and not sacrifice. So when we look at the false religions and the deities under which Israel would serve for 2,000 years, you find that they encourage all of these self-depriving acts rather than stressing a simple harmony with natural law and a simple obedience. This way that is very, very easy to do, but does not necessarily enrich the coffers of the church or the coffers of a particular preacher or priest or what have you. You also find that most of these systems are marked by an encouragement to obey tyrants. They exalt abusers and they demonize the victims. If you speak up, then you're labeled a heretic. They often take advantage of women, minorities, children, and they encourage and perpetuate abuse among their congregants. So these are all the types of systems of religion that Israel has lived under for 2,000 years. And it has not been a good or healthy system for Israel to have known. And this is really, I kind of call this in many ways the curse of curse. It's the curse of insanity. Deuteronomy 28:28, Yahweh will smite you with madness and blindness and astonishment. Following this verse, it says the sun will go down at noonday, and how Israel would only be oppressed and walk in blindness forevermore. So this particular curse of the law. Now notice, does this curse lead to death? Did the curse of the fruit of the body always lead to death? Well, no. All of these curses, the curse of diaspora was actually a curse of life, but the curse of life involved Israel living outside the covenant on foreign lands where she would be oppressed. So there is not a direct correlation between the curse of the law and death. But if you want to qualify living life under an oppressive system as death, well, that may be a credible summary or a credible analogy. But sometimes there is a direct correlation between life and death. Other times there is not. Now, with this curse of insanity, and this is religion insanity, what you find is that it's a curse of disagreement among doctrine, of religious divisions. And these religious divisions actually have consequences. There's conflict of wars, of politics between Jews, Christian, Muslims. It is what provides a divider. It provides a label whereby, I am this and you are that. You believe this and I believe that. It is a division based and defined on what we believe that separates us rather than what we believe that unites us. And how many times over the last 2,000 years has "in the name of God" been used and abused? And Isaiah, I think, really has an incredible understanding and handling over this division that would take place. And I'm just going to read Isaiah 29. This is going to be verses 10 through 14. I encourage you guys to read along with me if you'd like. It says, "For Yahweh has poured upon you the spirit of deep sleep. He has closed your eyes and the eyes of your rulers. The seers he has covered, and the vision has become to you as words in a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, please. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And this book is delivered to him that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray you. And he says, I am not learned. Wherefore Yahweh has said, For as much as this people draw near to me with their mouth and their lips, they honor me. But they have removed their heart from me, and their fear is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among their people. Now listen to this part. Even a marvelous work and a wonder. The wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid." Now, I'm going to say something pretty bold here. There are those who say that the wisdom of wise men in Israel has not perished over the last 2,500 years. In fact, they state that it was preserved through oral teachings and oral traditions, and that the ideas of Torah, the wisdom of Torah, has never perished in Israel's history. It has been preserved among elders. Well, if this is the case, and if this is true, then Isaiah is a liar. Because either wisdom has perished out of Israel or it has not. And when you look at the ideas within many modern sects, you find that what they do is they, in every case, encourage the words of men, the teachings of men that have a direct violation to the written word of Yahweh. And the words of men, the halakha of men, are exalted. They are taken and they are praised and they are voted on by a group of religious leaders, by a group of men, and they are followed by men. But at no case and in no place are they ever sanctioned by the word of Yahweh. So my question is this: are those not? Is not that process madness, blindness, and astonishment of heart? You find many um, ideas, but within all sects today, all sects that bear labels that divide. And they divide because they draw men away from the word of Yahweh rather than leading them to it. It is the word of Yahweh that unites, that provides healing, that reestablishes us with natural law and in harmony with the way that the earth is created. So when humanity bypasses men and returns to the written word of Yahweh, each of us can know Yahweh for himself. And that's what we're going to see is the promise that Yahweh leaves us with throughout all of the prophets. So one of the questions that I had in researching and looking at the many prescriptions within the law is if the curse of the law are just life or if they are just luck. We should see no correlations between turning from actions that violate the law and good health and peace. Well, what we find actually is that when we follow the instructions of the Tanakh, they actually work. There actually is a correlation between the lack of disease when those particular instructions are followed, as well as a correlation between disease when they are ignored. You find that studies of observant Jews for the past 100 years have shown that Jewish populations have fewer diseases that the rest of the society bears simply because they follow many of the kashrut laws. Now, I will say those studies are becoming more and more difficult to define because there are other factors now with the way food is produced, GMOs, hydrogenated oils, some of the chemicals and some of the other manipulation that we do to our products that cannot be taken in a pure study because of the way that society eats today. But when you look historically, you saw a direct correlation. You also see that crop rotation, something that is encouraged in the Jubilee, also helps to control diseases within the soil. So you do see a direct correlation between the teachings and instructions of the law as well as the health that humanity enjoys. And you also see peace. For those of you guys who are familiar with many of the teachings and many of the interviews that I have done on the idea of America and Constitution, the American Constitution has allowed a society to become a society based on laws and not the rules of men, not the whim of rulers, or to the dictates of her ruling elite or her industrial complex. Rather, the ideas of the American society and the American Constitution are the fact that we are all equally accountable to the law. And this is why America has flourished as a land of peace. We had one civil war that was based on a major division, based on a controversy over oppression. And we solved that. Did it take hand against one's brother? Yes, it did. But we came out of that better and stronger than what we had been before, and a freer land because of it. But overall, American society has been marked by peace. We don't participate in honor killings. We don't participate in going and when a crime has been committed, seeking justice at our own hands. Rather, we pursue justice through a court of law, and it is handled amicably and peaceably. Um, so we are seeing a paradigm, a way of life that works. And I have also shown how much of the American Constitution, not all of it, but a good, I would say 86% of the American Constitution actually correlates with the ideas of good governance that you find within the law of Moses, especially in Deuteronomy. So this is again a reestablishment of peace, and this is a way by which not only America, but Israel, the state of Israel, and the entire earth can one day have peace, where this history that we saw of wars being commonplace, where that becomes the exception rather than the rule. You also find diaspora. Diaspora is also coming to an end. We have a new beginning in 1948, where you have 70 years of 70 years of Jews being reestablished to the land, and not just Jews, but also Israelites from the northern kingdom. And I expect that to increase in the future. And then you have this promise in the future of healing of all diseases and healing of all nations. So the question becomes, how long? How long will this occur? How long will it last? In Hosea, we find the answer. This is what Hosea says. Come and let us return to Yahweh, for he has torn and he will heal us. He has smitten and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us, and the third day he will raise us up, and we will live in his sight. Now remember, this idea of living in the sight of Yahweh is that you have a presence on the promised land, that you are living within the land of Israel. Then we shall know if we will go on to follow Yahweh. His going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come to us as the rain, and as the latter and the former rain to the earth. So what we find in this is that there is a decreed end to desolation. Remember Asaph in Psalm 79. He goes through all of this. Why do the wicked prosper? Why is there persecution? Why are there wars? And why do the wicked prevail on the earth? You have all of these questions. And Asaph says, I was hasty until I went into the tabernacle. And it was there that I understood the end, how you brought them and all their fears upon them in a moment. You set them in slippery places. And then he talks about how good it is for us to wait upon Yahweh. So yes, there is a decreed end to diseases. There is a decreed end to many of the things that we struggle with today. And there is a time when we will be restored in righteousness and truth and peace. And most of all, the crazy religion things that we've seen over the last 2,000 years, those aren't going to be happening in the future, but rather we're going to be led in truth and wisdom, be reestablished in peace, and most of all, healing across the land, the reversal of the diseases that Yahweh had placed on the children of Israel throughout diaspora. Shabbat Shalom. Now, if you guys have any question, I encourage comments and questions. And Greg, yes, I totally agree with your comment. I actually came across a website this week that talked about how the word of Yahweh, the thus saith Yahweh, is of little importance, how it really doesn't matter, and that the sayings of men that are voted upon by men, and where every man pats his brother on his back, are superior to the word of Yahweh. I was just flabbergasted. I was disheartened to see this, and I had to wonder, have we learned anything in the last 2,000 years? At what point will we humble our heart? At what point will we become that putty that can be molded not by ourselves but by God? And that is something where I think we have to wait and see the good things that Yahweh has in store. Remember throughout scripture that Yahweh states that when he returns, that he also comes for judgment. He comes to the earth with that judgment, and it's not going to be nice for all people, but it will restore justice. It will restore, it will save from oppression. So, thank you so much, you guys, for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. It is possible I may be on vacation in 2 weeks, but I will let you know and keep you informed. Thank you so much for joining me, and Shavua Tov.